This is a continuation of the story that I narrated last week called I Was a Small Town Cop in Missouri. This is going to be an ongoing series for a little while. You don't need to listen to the first story to enjoy this story, but you might just want to check it out. And I'll put a link in the description so that you can easily find it. And also, while you're at it, if you could just give this video a thumbs up, maybe leave me a nice little comment down below. Well, it doesn't really have to be nice, but also, if you could hit that subscribe button. It costs nothing for you, and it puts a smile on my face. Today's story is from Kevin G, and he would like to dedicate it to N and K. He said, "Thank you for your input, your kindness, and your support." This account was discovered on a laptop that was found along 36 Highway near Macon, Missouri. It is one of over a dozen entries left by Calvin Bruce, a former St. Louis Department sergeant who went missing in 2021. Bruce served with distinction, earning commendations for valor, merit, and community engagement. He was the recipient of a captain's letter of accommodation, and according to this researcher's efforts, was known as an honorable man, even after he lost his position with the department. Addendum: I've done an exhaustive search of both the internet and the Missouri Secretary of State records specifically, and I found zero evidence of a town called Shady Oaks anywhere within the state. There is no city, town, or unincorporated community anywhere near the city of Buckland, as Bruce indicated in his first log. Furthermore, I've driven to the area in question, and there is no perpendicular road before the turnoff into Buckland. Aside from the logs found on the laptop, zero evidence of his whereabouts was ever found on that stretch of 36 Highway. He just vanished. April 14th, 2021. Second log entry of Calvin Bruce, Chief of Police, Shady Oaks. So, I'm trapped in this town that I was lured to by somebody. Folks around here tend to think that it's the town itself, but I'm not sure I believe that. Still, the shit I've seen in just the first couple of days has severely stretched my concept of reality pretty damn far. So maybe a town can send a letter. Either way, here I am. While figuring out a way to get out of Shady Oaks is an ever-present goal, there isn't really anything to go on, or a place to start. Besides, a lot of people here need help. Like, a lot of people. To the point where I hadn't put my ass to the leather of my dated and uncomfortable new office chair before someone stepped into the hole in the wall that is the police station and asked for it. She said her name was Caitlin, and asked if I was the new chief. When I confirmed her suspicions, she demanded that I deal with whatever was killing her chickens. And I have to say, I almost laughed in her face. Once I realized that she was serious, I asked her where she lived, and she informed me that it was she who managed the farm at the end of town. So I found a yellow pad in my new desk drawer, and I took down her statement. As it turned out, Miss Caitlin took care of some 30 or so chickens, several goats, and at least 3 pigs, one of which was now missing along with the dead chickens. She described the attack as gruesome, and insisted that it couldn't be a coyote or a fox, and to not even suggest it. When I told her that I wasn't going to, she seemed quite surprised and calmed down a touch. I got all the details from Caitlin and told her that while I was just getting my bearings, I promised to look into it right away. She seemed to accept that and told me that if I was going to do any poking around at the farm, to holler and let her know I was there, so she didn't shoot me. She then welcomed me to Shady Oaks, almost sounding sweet, and just left as quickly as she had arrived. Honestly, I found myself chuckling at the whole exchange. I paused for a second and just took a moment to look around the police station. which is, by the way, a substation. The whole first floor was only a little bit bigger than my old bullpen in St. Louis was, and it shared a wall with the post office on one side and an old hardware store on the other, both of which were abandoned. The second floor was apparently all storage. Aside from the cells and my new office, which I wasn't even sure I was going to use, there wasn't much more than a couple of desks, a bathroom, and a kitchenette. I did find some supplies and equipment though. All of the typical paraphernalia was available. Office supplies and a yellow pad, a couple of pens, which seemed to be the only ones, and this old-ass laptop I'm working on. There was also some specialized equipment, handcuffs and keys for them, radios which apparently worked, and even a couple of old-school nightsticks, one of which I took. I found some .38 rounds in my new desk, which had apparently belonged to my predecessor before he went missing. Or so Adam told me. I didn't have a weapon that fired that type of round though, so I left them where they were. There was also a locked rifle cage, which had what looked like an old lever-action rifle, and a box of ammunition for it. But I couldn't find the key. It made me miss the ARs we'd had in our units back in St. Louis, but it also made me glad I never bought my own, which I had grand plans to. The idea of a rifle, or any weapon for that matter, that belonged to me being out of my possession and control would have bothered the shit out of me. But then again, it probably only mattered if I found my way out of Shady Oaks. After looking around a bit, I grabbed my shotgun and strapped the sling I'd found to it, then made sure it and my Glock were loaded before I went outside to my SUV. Next to it was an old beater of a truck with police markings on it, which had also apparently belonged to my predecessor. And I took a look, but it had clearly not been driven in some time. Apparently, most people around Shady Oaks didn't drive much due to a lack of gas, which made sense. It wasn't like they were getting regular deliveries. The lack of gas, a problem in and of itself, begged another question, however, and one I expected I already knew the answer to. Wanda, the woman I met when I first arrived in the area, had been driving into town when her vehicle was attacked by, well, whatever the hell that thing was that I shot the other day had been. I had assumed that she'd just arrived like me, but it hit me suddenly the morning after that she knew a lot about Shady Oaks, and where things and people were. Lenny, the grocer and medic, also seemed to know her. So where had she been headed when she was attacked? I didn't know for sure, but I made a note to ask her about it when I saw her again. I decided to take a walk and get a lay of the land in my new jurisdiction. The layout was your typical rural Midwestern town, with the City Hall government building right in the center of town square, surrounded by a multitude of businesses and other official buildings like my station. Most of the businesses were abandoned, but a few still had occupants who attempted to do the work for which the building was intended. On the southeast corner of town square was a corner cafe that had a sign which read exactly that, but scratched into the top of it was the word Milton's, indicating its current owner. Adam had told me that the place served decent meals, but that the menu was limited for obvious reasons. I resolved to check it out once I checked in on the situation with Caitlin. There was also an old tailor's shop, which was apparently run by a gal named Renna, who altered and repurposed everyone's clothes, and even made some new ones. I passed it on my way to the northwest side of town, and a pretty blonde gal, who I can only assume was Renna, looked out at me in surprise and worry, but then softened and smiled at me. I waved back but kept going. Business before pleasure. The sky was gray and overcast that day, as it had been when I first arrived in Shady Oaks. It never seemed to really get sunny there, and when night came, it was always very, very dark. I clutched my Seeker pocket flashlight, remembering the creature I'd run into the day before. It was rechargeable, so I didn't need batteries, but electricity in town was complicated. Unlike the water and sewer, which was maintained by someone apparently, getting power in Shady Oaks was spotty and difficult. The grid for the whole town was rigged to a substation outside of town, but it had been damaged when Greg, the electrician who maintained it, was killed. Now the power came and went when it liked, and folks got used to charging battery-powered stuff when they were able to, and got even more used to using candles inside the home at night. All in all, the idiosyncrasies of Shady Oaks made for a spooky-ass little town, especially the whole trap you for eternity aspect, which everybody but me seemed almost ambivalent to. Almost everyone. Anyway, I made my way across town on foot to this old house with a barn and a fence with a bunch of animals inside it, which I could only assume was Caitlin's farm. I approached cautiously, heeding her earlier words, and called out to her in my best cop voice. She appeared out of the barn moments later, holding a Ruger American bolt-action rifle, which made me glad that I listened to her. Normally, I would have drawn on her and demanded that she put the weapon down, but the situation was far from normal. From what Adam the clerk told me, most folks in town carried some kind of weapon all the time, especially if they did a lot of walking around outside. So I decided to do my best to be aware of the weapon, but calm. Caitlin called out to me by the title of Chief, and I got the feeling that she was quite comfortable falling into the dynamic she'd been used to with the last guy who had the job. I didn't mind. It was my role after all. I had her show me where the chickens had been killed, and she led me to a spot near the inside of the fence line, where there was a patch of gore. It was pretty obvious that it was some kind of wild animal, or something like a wild animal, as there was little left to indicate that what had been killed was even a chicken. I asked Caitlin when she thought the attack had occurred, and she told me that it was in the middle of the night before I got into town, which made sense given the level of decomp, though I wasn't sure I was up on my foul post-mortem timeline. I asked her if she'd heard or seen anything, and she told me that she heard the chickens going crazy. And when she looked out her window with her flashlight, she saw a dark shape hovering over them. I stiffened when she mentioned a dark shape, my mind conjuring images of the creature I'd shot the day before. I worried that it was what killed Caitlin's chickens, but I didn't say anything. There was no sense in worrying her over a suspicion anyway. I pressed on and asked her if she'd come out to confront the creature, or otherwise chase it away. "Of course not!" Caitlin practically yelled at me like I was insane, as she shifted from foot to foot. "Nobody goes out at night. Most people don't even open their windows. But I've got animals to look after." I glanced up at her house and noted that every single window had heavy shutters on the outside, and all but one of them was closed. I recall seeing similar shutters on a lot of the houses, but also the metal grating all over the grocery store windows and the door. It honestly reminded me of Hyde Park. I turned back to the pile of viscera and noted that while it was a mess of gore, there wasn't a lot of blood. I asked her how many chickens had been killed, and she told me 5 over the last week. That wasn't good. If there were only 30 chickens for the whole damn town, and we just lost 5, we were going to run out of them at this rate, and Adam had impressed upon me how important the food supply situation was. Didn't you say something about a pig?" I asked Caitlin as I stood up, trying to sound more distracted than nervous. "Yep," Caitlin replied, nonplussed, as she pointed over to the fence gate. "That fucker's always sneaking out and wandering around. He's a stealthy bastard, I'll give him that, but he's going to get himself killed. For me, it's only a concern to me because of his value. That's a lot of meat just to run off." She shrugged, but still seemed concerned. Like she knew it was important, but was unwilling or unable to do anything about it. I didn't bother asking if she'd gone out and searched for the pig, because it was now clear to me that she figured that this was my job. I spent the next 15 minutes or so taking pictures of the area with my phone camera, which I decided to keep using, even with the power issues, because it was too useful and second nature to me at this point. It's funny, most people only see their phone as a method of communication or games, but they often overlook the very useful tools most phones have. Most phones have a camera, of course, which isn't just for selfies. You got note-taking apps, a calendar which doubles as an appointment book, and planner. You've got an alarm clock, stopwatch, and time, which is to say nothing of it being a timepiece. You also have a calculator and a voice recorder for taking quick notes, or recording sounds to be analyzed later. All of these can be used offline, at any time. Also, if you're smart like me and download languages to your phone, you can use Google Translate as well. Now that last one was invaluable multiple times during my career in St. Louis. While I was worried about not being able to charge it in the long term, I knew that I could do so from my car battery, even with the engine off. I expected that or similar tricks, and jerry-rigging was how most people were able to use devices here, if they bothered to use them at all. As I searched around the area with the chicken's remains, I noticed some odd tracks near the edge of the gore, which led out under the fence and went off into the woods. Once I'd gotten a good set of photos from the scene of the kills, I went over to the gate and took some more, trying to see if I could spot some hoof prints from the pig. I did, actually, and was able to discern a clear path which led into the woods to the west. Since finding and dealing with whatever killed the chickens was a priority, I decided to follow the odd circular-shaped prints to the north. If I came up short, or killed the badger or whatever it was, I'd go looking for the pig. I want whoever is reading this to know, this is not the typical job of even a typical rural police officer. Now, I've never worked in animal control or conservation, which is who would normally deal with this, so I only kind of knew what I was doing. But I was the one who was there, so I was going to do it. I followed the tracks to the tree line where they pretty much disappeared as the mud of the farmyard gave way to green grass. Again, I don't really know how to track, but I could follow a trail if I spot it, and I'm pretty good at spotting blood, which stands out hard on green if it's fresh. I picked up a smear of red on the grass inside the tree line that looked a lot like chicken guts at the farm. I took a nice long deep breath to steady myself and really process what I was about to do. The chill, damp air felt good in my lungs, but didn't assuage the warning in my gut. About 30 feet beyond the edge of the tree line, a thick but wispy cloud of concealing mist stared back at me. The same mist that seemed to hang heavy within the woods that surrounded Shady Oaks. It concealed more than just the sins of those who had come before. It concealed monsters. I genuinely contemplated bailing for a minute. I really did. It wasn't really in my purview to deal with something like this, and heading into the woods after what might have been a damn dog might not be the best idea considering the circumstances. I might have had better luck laying in wait for whatever the attacker happened to be, but that involved being outside after dark, which everyone seemed to indicate was tantamount to suicide. So I took the first step into those woods, and then the next, and then the next. After a minute or two, I looked back and sure enough, couldn't see the farm through the mists, and immediately moved back in the direction I'd come from until I saw the barn again. I racked my brain trying to figure out a way to leave a trail, and wished that I grabbed some crime scene tape from the office. I decided just to mark the trees with an X with my pocket knife, rather than waste the daylight of going all the way back to the station, and I pressed on. I tried to keep an eye out for the weird tracks I'd found near the gore at the farm, and I took my phone out to look at the pictures of them. They were oddly uniform, and seemed weirdly close together, but like I said, I also didn't know a damn thing about tracking animals. I was able to follow them well enough for a while, and then they just disappeared when I entered a clearing. I stood there looking around for the next one for a minute, but spun around when I heard a sound from behind me that scared the living shit out of me. It was a kind of awful, inhuman squeal that sounded both angry and fearful at the same time. I was so jarred by the sound that I reflexively dropped my knife and snapped up my shotgun on its sling. I caught movement in the trees and took aim at whatever was coming at me, ready to blow whatever the hell it was away with a well-placed slug. The sound it made intensified as it drew closer, and I started to make out a shape through the trees. Whatever it was slower to the ground than I expected, so I adjusted my aim to compensate. Just as I was about to hit dead center of mass, I angrily pulled my weapon to the side at the last second, when the pale pink-white shape of a fat-ass pig burst from the trees to the west. He ran right up to me, like a lost little kid freaking out, and I hated the sound he was making. Like I just wanted to shoot him in the face over it, and it was everything in me not to just do it. I knew it was almost entirely nerves, but I had to consciously focus on having empathy for the poor guy for a minute. It was hard to, because he kinda crashed into me and knocked me back into the direction I'd come from. I stumbled back, and while I tried to catch myself on the nearby tree, the little bastard knocked me right over onto my back, and I wanted to punch him right in his snorting fat little nose, but I didn't have time to even figure out where he was. I was too distracted by the large black shape that descended towards me from up in the trees. Then I noticed another, and another. Each figure was just a little bigger than the pig, and as black as the shady oak's night. They moved slowly down the trunks of the trees surrounding the clearing on multiple gangly insect-like legs. Now, I'd never seen anything like them outside of a movie, and I don't think any movie I'd ever seen matched the feeling of total revulsion I felt when I looked at them. Especially when I got a look at their saw-like mouths and hook-like mandibles. I was transfixed by the sight of these monsters. That it came as quite a shock to me when I realized that one of them wasn't climbing down, but falling. It landed only 2 or so feet from me with multiple sickening thumps as each of its 8 legs hit the ground individually. It looked right at me and let out a loud, freakish clicking noise as it scuttled toward me. I will admit freely, I absolutely screamed at that moment. I screamed like a chick in a horror movie, because that's what I felt like. Fortunately for me, unlike most of the women in horror movies, I had a shotgun, and I used it. I lifted up my Remington with one hand as I pushed myself up with my other, and blasted the thing right in what I hoped was its face. What followed was a spray of blood so massive that it painted the ground and the trees behind the creature in red. Following the roar of my weapon's discharge was a chorus of the horrible, clicking chirps that the first creature had made, as its fellows leapt from the trees above. I scrambled backwards on my ass and rolled to get into a crouching position as fast as I could. When I was again right side up, I racked the slide on my gun and aimed it in the vague direction of the clearing. Right as my weapon came level, 4 more of the things landed loudly in front of me. One of them was practically right where I'd been laying a moment before. I sent a slug into that one too, turning the area into a red, sticky mess. Then I pumped the shotgun again and turned it toward one of the others. To my surprise and relief, none of them were coming at me any longer. 2 of them had scurried over to the bloody mess I'd made of their friend and jammed their screwed-up, serrated mouths into its dead corpse. The third had ambled over to the east, which was, I soon realized, the direction the pig had gone. It was right here that I also realized that the pig had literally saved my damn life. There was no mistake that if I'd been standing where I'd been a breath before, that monster would have landed right on top of me, and its knife mouth would have been buried into my neck. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I was suddenly filled with the protective rage for that fat ass, and just then I wasn't about to let some spider monster eat him. I raised my gun and I fired at the spider thing, but missed as it went behind a tree. I racked the slide and ran over to get a better shot, but heard movement to my right as one of them decided to stop eating his pal and came at me. I knew I wouldn't have time to bring the gun around, so I let go of it with one hand and reached for the nightstick I grabbed from the station house. I kicked at the creature's face in the same motion, which didn't do much, but it stopped its advance. I lifted that nightstick and I brought it down hard onto the thing's body. You see, I still wasn't sure of their anatomy, but it was close to where its mouth was. The attack didn't have the effect that I'd expected though, and I realized these creatures had a hard shell, kind of like a crab or a turtle. Not to be dissuaded though, I hammered at it again and again until I heard a crunch, and then I hammered at it some more. After a bit, the creature stopped moving, and I figured it was either dead or sufficiently concussed to cease its egress. I dropped my nightstick and I lifted my shotgun with both hands to finish off the other one that was still feeding on its buddy. I realized as I carefully took aim that it was jabbing its sawtooth into the other one's body and sucking the blood out of it. Now I knew why there wasn't a lot of blood left near where the chickens were killed. I was going to watch longer to figure out what the hell it was, but the pig squealed again. I turned towards the porcine cries and ran off to save the pig who'd saved me. When I rounded the tree, I expected to see the last of the horrible nightmare spider things chasing him. Instead, I saw only the pig, standing about 20 feet away in the trees. He squealed in alarm when he saw me, and that's when I heard that terrifying sound of the clicking chirp coming from just above me and to my right. I spun around and managed to bring my shotgun up defensively as the thing fell right on top of me, its serrated mess of a mouth only inches from my own face, and that stench coming from its mouth was like every dead body call I'd ever been on all at once. Unlike my first encounter with something jumping on top of me from up in a tree, this time I managed to stay on my feet. I shifted my weight and pushed with all my strength onto my shotgun, sending it and the critter sailing into the clearing. Unfortunately, one of the thing's hook teeth bit into my collarbone as I heaved it, and it took a little chunk with it when it went. Holding my neck where the thing bit me, I quickly unholstered my pistol and ran up to put a foot on the little crab. I shot 2 rounds into where I guessed its brain was, and like all the others, it laid still. I reached down to retrieve my Remington and noted several deep gouges in the grip that told me clearly that these things' teeth were razor sharp. I found myself grateful that it hadn't been the barrel, or I might have been out of weapon. I turned back to the trees where the pig had run and found him trotting into the clearing. Relieved again, I started to move toward the little oinker and stumbled quite involuntarily. I shook my head and tried moving forward again, and again I stumbled and suddenly felt dizzy. I reached up at my neck and pulled away some blood on my fingers. I brought the blood to my nose and sniffed and recoiled at the stench. I realized quickly that whatever those things were, their bite seemed to carry some kind of venom or a toxin. Now I started to panic then, and I looked around in a daze for my trail marks, but I couldn't find them. I stumbled heavily and realized that I was delirious and losing motor function. I've seldom been so afraid in my life, and I knew that if I didn't get to town, and quickly, I was just going to be another corpse in the woods. Just as I was about to start screaming for help, I heard an oddly encouraging noise. The pig snorted at me, and I turned to see him moving back into the woods. I followed him, half knowing him leading me back was my only chance, and half deliriously trying to capture him like I'd planned to. He led me in a different direction than I'd come, but not the opposite one. We played a little game, or it seemed as such, and every time I started to falter and feel like I was going to pass out, he'd squeal and bring me back to consciousness. Now it went on like that for some time, until I burst from a tree line to find the back of Caitlin's quaint little house. I called out to her as I staggered toward the farm, and I dropped to one knee. I turned back to the woods to see the pig standing just at the tree line. "Good pig, good pig," I told him with more enthusiasm and affection than I'd ever expected to feel for an animal that I was planning to eat. In response, he snorted at me in what I can only describe as affirmative. Then he turned around and just disappeared back into those woods. I decided to let him go, mostly because, well, I couldn't really stop him, but also because I owed him one. 2, actually. Well, shit, maybe that was 3. Anyway, the last thing I remember from that day was Caitlin helping me into her house and passing out on her couch. I dreamt of nothing but pigs with spider legs, which sounds way more worse than what I actually saw, and probably is. I woke in the middle of the night, having no idea where I was, but found Caitlin sitting in front of me in a rocking chair, with her rifle across her lap. At first, I thought she was going to shoot me, but calmed when she seemed relieved that I had woken up. She told me in no uncertain terms that I'd been lucky, that if she'd not found me before dark, I'd be dead right now. I explained in broad strokes what had happened, and Caitlin seemed shaken to her core at my description of the creatures. She told me she'd never seen anything that fit that description, but that Adam might know more. She thanked me for helping her and everyone, and told me that I was a little bit more tenacious than my predecessor, which I can only take as a compliment. Then she asked me the question I've been dreading since I woke up. "So, did you find the pig?" Caitlin asked me curiously and raised an eyebrow. "Nope," I told her casually, lying for the first time in my entire professional career. Wilbur lives to fight another day.